The dusty heart of liberty beat slow beneath a sun like molten gold, but the air was thick with a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. The townsfolk, a gallery of shadows and stiff-brimmed hats, watched a man named Jack Hale by his death for 12 copper pennies. The preacher's words, a low, mournful croak, warned him of the land's curse of men buried and secrets sealed, but Jack's eyes, deep-set and weary, held no fear. They'd seen enough death at Antietam to know its many faces. A blood-stained handkerchief forgotten in a pocket felt colder than the chill in the air, a relic from another life, a life where he'd been a farmer with a wife named Sarah and a boy named Thomas gone to the fever. The scent of her last breath on that square of cotton was a ghost that haunted him, a burden of unkept promises. He took the deed, and as he mounted his horse, a curse-like chill slithered down his spine. The air felt heavy, and he could feel two pairs of eyes on his back, a judge with a face carved from granite and a man in a coat as black as a funeral shroud, a scar like a lightning strike across his jaw. This was Wyatt Blackwood, a problem solver for the railroad, and a man whose gaze was as cold as a snake's. Wyatt had sent a chill through the entire town, a silent warning to stay away from the cursed land of Whispering Creek. Jack, however, had only 12 cents, and that's all he could afford. The trail wound through sparse pines, the air growing thinner, a hollow ache in Jack's gut. This was his last chance at putting down roots. As the sun began to bleed into the horizon, he crested a rise, the cabin appearing like a forgotten memory, weathered quiet. But a low rumble from his wolfhound Ranger broke the silence. Jack drew his Winchester, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. The air was tense with the smell of danger. A figure hung from the cabin's gate, twisting gently in the wind. Not a man already dead, but a warrior in his final moments, still breathing. Jack cut the man down, an act that felt like a quiet sacrament. He carried him into the ransacked cabin, the air thick with the smell of dust and despair, and laid him on a salvage table. The Apache warrior's eyes, deep and burning, with a fierce intelligence, met his. Blackwood's men, the warrior rasped a single phrase, cutting through the silence. They wanted to know where my daughter hid the papers. Jack's fingers stilled. This was a war he hadn't asked for, and a war he'd already lost. The man was Two Ravens, a war chief reported dead 5 years ago. He spoke of a silver mine hidden beneath their sacred land of treaties forged, and of a geologist, Samuel, who had been hanged for trying to tell the truth. Two Ravens offered a map, a piece of deerskin, with Apache symbols, and a riddle from Samuel: find them where blood and water meet. The war chief's death song filled the small cabin, an ancient melody that raised the hairs on Jack's neck. As the song died, Two Ravens' breath stilled. Jack was left with a dead man on a table, a blood-soaked map, and a war he was now a part of. Outside in the moonlight, 3 riders watched from the tree line. Wyatt Blackwood. He'd wasted no time in coming to check on his handiwork. Jack put out the lantern, checking his revolver. 12 cents had bought him more than a cabin and 12 acres. It had bought him a war, and for the first time in years he felt the ghost of his old promise stirring within him, a purpose he thought had died at Gettysburg. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the town of Redemption, a place that lived up to its name, a place where men sought absolution, not through prayer, but through whiskey and willing women. The town was a cesspool of saloons, dust, and lawlessness, and at its heart sat a courthouse and a sheriff's office. This was Judge Crane's domain, a man bought and paid for by Wyatt Blackwood and Governor Webb. Jack and Maria, daughter of Two Ravens, had spent a grueling night evading Blackwood's men. Maria was a bruised and battered mess, but her eyes, alive with defiance, held the same fierce determination as her father's. They found refuge in a rundown cabin on the outskirts, home to a woman named Dolores Hayes. Her husband, a U.S. Marshal, had been investigating Crane and Webb when he was killed. His death ruled as suicide, though Dolores swore he'd been shot in the back of the head. She had a cold smile and a righteous fire burning in her eyes, a promise of revenge. Maria confessed the documents they needed were in 3 places. One set in the cabin, another in the judge's office, and a third in a lockbox at the site of the massacre. The riddle where blood and water meet was the only clue. Dolores had been planning her own revenge, a fiery distraction that would keep Blackwood and his men occupied. As night fell, a storm broke over Redemption, a torrential downpour that turned the streets to mud. It was the perfect cover. Jack and Maria slipped out of Dolores's cabin and made their way to the livery stable. Inside, they found a hidden trapdoor, a secret entrance into a dark, damp tunnel that led directly to the courthouse basement. "My father was right about you," Maria said, her voice a soft murmur in the oppressive darkness. "He knew your kind. Men who carry guilt like a second skin." They made their way through the basement, climbing a hidden servant staircase to the second floor to Judge Crane's office. A single oil lamp cast long dancing shadows. Maria, a lockpick in her hand, worked on the safe. "Samuel said these Remingtons all have a manufacturing flaw," she murmured, her ear pressed to the steel door. "If you listen carefully," a soft click, then another, and the door swung open. Inside were stacks of documents, the damning proof of a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the territorial government. Maria grabbed what she needed, and they turned to leave, but the door burst open. A deputy, revolver in hand, stood silhouetted in the doorway. Jack reacted, bringing his own revolver, but down hard on the man's temple. The deputy crumpled to the floor. As they fled, the sound of glass breaking, shouts, and gunfire echoed from the street. Dolores's distraction, they reached the basement stairs. But Sheriff Miller, a fat, droopy-mustached man, was waiting for them. Just as he was about to shoot, a deafening roar split the air. Dolores, holding a shotgun, stood behind him, her face grim. "Nobody's making it quick for anyone tonight," she said before gunshots thundered twice more. They plunged into the tunnel, pulling the door closed behind them, but the muffled gunshots followed them. Dolores was making her stand. She had given them a chance to escape. They emerged from the livery stable to find the town of Redemption in chaos. The Golden Palace was ablaze, flames licking at the night sky. But as they tried to slip away, a voice called out, "Hale, stop where you are." Wyatt Blackwood, bruised and his coat torn, stood in their path. Maria drove a heavy piece of wood into the back of his knee, and he went down with a howl of pain. They took him prisoner, a desperate bid to survive. Dawn broke over the Montana Badlands, a clear, cold canvas after the night's storm. Jack, Maria, and their prisoner Wyatt Blackwood had traveled all night, a silent, tense trio, avoiding trails and keeping to the shadows. Blackwood, a man who had lost his composure in the face of his own demise, watched Jack carefully, his eyes holding a new light. "You're making a mistake, Hale," he said. "Let me go, and I can make you rich." He spoke of the silver mine, of millions, and of a position as territorial marshal, a fresh start. The words were like a siren song, a test of Jack's character, of the man he'd become and the man he'd once been. Blackwood revealed a terrifying secret, a festering wound in Jack's past, the truth about why he'd killed Marshal Tanner back in Dodge City. "Tanner was my wife's brother," Blackwood said, his voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. "He let her die. Vengeance, not justice, had been the true motive, a truth Jack had buried beneath years of wandering." Blackwood offered him a deal, his freedom and silence on the Dodge City affair in exchange for Maria and the documents. They rode on their journey, becoming increasingly treacherous. They entered a narrow pass along a cliff face, a trail Blackwood swore was a death trap. True to his word, the colonel's horse reared, spooked by a falling rock, and he tumbled over the precipice. Jack, in a moment of reflexive grace, grabbed Blackwood's coat, saving his life. "Why?" Blackwood gasped, terror replacing the arrogance in his eyes. "Because I'm not the cold-blooded killer you think I am," Jack replied, "and because you're going to face justice for what you did." They continued along the path, their destination, the massacre site at Whispering Creek, now just a few miles away. Maria pointed to a spot where the creek curved around a large boulder. "There," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "where their blood soaked into the earth, we buried the lockbox." As she dug frantically at the base of the boulder, a rifle shot rang out. The first of Blackwood's men had found them. "Move toward the horses," Jack shouted, pulling her behind the boulder, their only cover from the hail of bullets. They mounted quickly, Blackwood sharing Jack's horse, a human shield. The ride was a blur of dust and danger. As they galloped away, Blackwood taunted him. "You think you're different from me? We're the same. Men who do what's necessary." But Maria, her face a mask of fierce determination, spoke over the wind. "My people will be remembered," she said, "and so will your crimes." They raced eastward, pushing their tired horses into the heart of the Badlands. Blackwood, calm now, revealed his final secret. "You'll never make it," he said, nodding toward the horizon, where dark clouds were gathering. "Summer storms, flash, floods. My men know this country better than you ever will." He had planned for every contingency, and now he was leading them into the final trap. As thunder rumbled, Jack crushed a silver disc from Blackwood's boot heel, a signal tracker. The colonel had been leaving a trail, guiding his men to them every step of the way. The line shack, a crude one-room structure, offered little shelter from the relentless storm. Jack, Maria, and their prisoner were trapped. The rain was a solid sheet, and the Badlands would flood by morning, making any escape impossible. Blackwood's men would be waiting for them at first light. Maria, however, had an idea. "These shacks often have escape tunnels," she said, searching the fireplace, her fingers finding a loose stone. It led to a narrow tunnel, an escape route big enough for a single man. "Go first," Jack told Maria. "I'll be right behind you." But as she moved to enter, Blackwood's voice from outside cut through the storm. "Colonel Blackwood, are you in there?" a voice called out. Jack, in a moment of desperation, cut Blackwood's bonds. "A life for a life, Colonel. That's the deal." Blackwood Free promised to give them a head start. "I pay my debts." "Hail," he said, a thin, cruel smile on his face. "One way or another." Jack watched as Maria disappeared into the tunnel. He turned back to Blackwood. "Remember your debt," he said as the cabin door burst open, revealing the men who had been hunting them. From the safety of the tunnel, Jack heard Blackwood's calm voice. "Stand down, gentlemen. Our friends have fled west toward liberty." Jack crawled through the tunnel and emerged behind the cabin where Maria was waiting. They raced through the woods, two ghosts on the run, their horses left behind, their only way out through a wash of muddy water. The water, a symbol of their freedom, left no tracks. They made good time on foot, but the Badlands with its unforgiving terrain was a labyrinth. Exhaustion began to take its toll, their pace slowing. Blackwood's words, his final betrayal, gnawed at Jack. He knew this path through the maze. Maria said, her voice filled with a hollow certainty. "It's an old Apache trail. I told my father about it." Two ravens had broken under torture. The documents they carried were more than just evidence of a land fraud. They were proof of a conspiracy that reached the highest halls of government, a plan for systematic extermination of the tribes. They found themselves trapped in a canyon with four of Blackwood's men waiting for them. The men, calm and confident, had known exactly where they would be. "The colonel wants you alive," the leaders said, "but not in what condition." Maria offered to hand over the papers. She held up a bundle, a decoy. As all eyes watched it arc through the air, Jack drew and fired, hitting the leader square in the chest. Another man fell, then another. The last man surrendered, and Jack, a ghost of his former self, a man who had left violence behind, told him to ride back to Blackwood. Tell him his debt is now paid in full. With the decoy, they had bought themselves a chance, a glimmer of hope. They rode on their horses taken from the dead, men their mission to reach Cedar Ridge, where a marshal named Wilson could help them. But they were still two fugitives on the run from a man who never forgot a debt, and the truth they carried was a weight that could get them all killed. Fort Carney stood on a bluff overlooking the Missouri River, a bastion of military might and a symbol of American betrayal. Jack, battered and bruised, sat in a cell beneath the guardhouse. Lieutenant Hollister, the son of the senator implicated in the documents, was his interrogator. Hollister, a man of conscience, was torn between his orders and the truth. He'd seen Jack's war record, heard the stories of his courage. He couldn't reconcile the man in the cell with the traitor Blackwood had described. He'd even read the documents. He knew the truth about Whispering Creek, about the forged treaties, about his own father's complicity. He knew the legacy he was defending was a lie. The cell door opened and Blackwood, resplendent in a freshly pressed uniform, entered. He was the devil in a cavalry uniform, a man who knew how to use secrets as a weapon. He revealed his trump card, the truth about Dodge City, about how Jack had killed Marshall Tanner, his wife's brother, for letting his wife and child die of fever. He offered Jack a deal, his life and silence on the Dodge City affair, in exchange for Maria and the documents. "We all have our secrets, Hale," he said, "our buried sins." But Jack, a man who had come to terms with his past, a man who had found his line, refused. "I die because it's the right thing to do," he said. Maria arrived at the fort as dusk settled, the documents secured in Blackwood's saddlebags. He reunited her with Jack, placing them in adjoining cells, a cruel game of psychological torture. He wanted them to feel their impending defeat. "You'll see your champion soon enough," he told Maria, "though he may not be quite as you remember him." But Maria, a woman who had seen the worst of humanity, was not broken. From her sleeve, she withdrew a slender metal pin, a lockpick. The spirits work in mysterious ways, she whispered to Jack through the bars. As night fell, they slipped out of their cells. They found themselves on the parade ground, a wide open space that offered no cover. But then they saw him, Lieutenant Hollister, making his way to Blackwood's office. He had a copy of the documents, and he had a plan. He was going to expose the conspiracy, to clear his family name, to do what was right. Jack and Maria watched as Hollister confronted Blackwood, the young officer's voice trembling with righteous fury. "I've made copies, Colonel, of everything," he said. "The truth comes out one way or another." A shot rang out, then another. Jack saw Hollister's body slump to the floor, 2 bullets to the chest. Blackwood had made his final, most heinous move. Jack climbed through the window, his body aching with every movement. He took the documents, all of them, including Hollister's copies. He found a half-completed telegraph from Blackwood to Senator Hollister, a lie about his son's heroic death. He stuffed it all into his coat. He helped Maria out the window, the alarm now ringing throughout the fort. They raced for the river, a final desperate escape. They found a rowboat, and Maria, a woman who had been through hell and back, rowed them into the darkness. The Missouri carried them away from the fort, from the men who would hunt them, from the truth they carried. Jack held the documents to his chest, a weight both heavy and light. He had found his line again, the one he wouldn't cross. A 12-cent cabin had cost him his freedom, but it had bought him something more. It had bought him redemption,